On Friday, June 11th, there'll be thousands of dollars to be won. A lotto jackpot of $302,000. A new home, car, or that college education.
Lotto, you have to be in it to win it.
Next lotto jackpot, $302,000.
This evening on the VC3 News Update, the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, makes donation to the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Police Force. The Fisheries Department in SVG called on fisheries stakeholders globally to invest sustainably in our seas and oceans. And the Center for Disease Control, CDC, updated SVG COVID-19 alerts at level 3. We'll have these stories and more coming up at 7 p.m. on the VC3 News Update.
This one is fabulous.
Yes, fabulous. It's Fabulous 500. Another $5 scratch game from the NLE. Loaded with $500 cash prizes.
With a top prize of $25,000.
You have 10 chances to win.
Fabulous $500.
There's cash to catch with just a scratch. Fabulous. Fabulous 500.
More jackpot money, more reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6 a bigger jackpot game.
The Super 6 jackpot for Friday, June 11th is $270,000. Super 6, more jackpot money.
Hey! More jackpot money, more reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6 a bigger jackpot game.
Welcome to this week's edition of Roundtable Talk. As many of you know, June 5th, that's last Saturday, was observed as World Environment Day, and yesterday was observed as World Oceans Day. The theme for World Environment Day was ecosystem restoration. With me to talk about ecosystem restoration and all things environmental this evening are our special guests at the round table, Dr. REYNOLD Murray, Chief Forestry Officer, FITZGERALD Providence, and join us by Zoom all the way from the UK, Dr. Andrew Simmons. Good evening, gentlemen, and welcome.
Good evening. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Good evening.
It's good to have all three of you. For those of us who are novices and who would know, when we talk about the ecosystem, what exactly are we talking about? And I'll ask Dr. Murray to have the first go at that.
Okay. Ecosystem, we're talking about the whole life system, all the living things interacting together, right? We're not separating them out. We like to talk about human ecosystems or marine ecosystems. We're separating them out into different groups. But when we think of ecosystem, we're thinking of the whole of creation or evolution, whichever side you want to take, acting together in one concert.
Okay, and why is it important for us to restore
our
ecosystem?
Because we are an integral part of this, and in fact, I think sometimes we're the most destructive part of the whole ecosystem. The system tends to work in balance if you leave it to itself, but man has interfered so much, we don't want to die. So we do everything to keep human beings alive as long as possible. And every little defect, we try to fix it so that the human population keeps expanding. Unlike the other organisms, they have a way of limiting their population growth, one way or other. But we don't want to do that. We want to control the other organisms, but we expand uncontrollably. And so that's a problem, because we survive by their existence. They're our source of food, they're our source of energy in a number of places, they're the nutrients to the soil, they do so many different things. So when we outnumber them, we put the whole ecosystem off balance and put ourselves in jeopardy. So it's necessary to come to some kind of balance, and for restoration, especially like we just had the volcanic eruption, we'd have lost some species or damage done to some ecosystems. So we need to restore those because we are dependent on them.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Providence, from where you sit as Chief Forestry Officer, why is this important, the restoration of the ecosystem?
Well, just in terms of looking at the theme, it also expands to reimagine, restore, and recreate. And ecosystems, we, as Dr. Murray said, we function in an ecosystem, and we must, as humans, find our place in it. And as the Director of Forestry, and as we at Forestry, we're what you say, the first custodians of the forest. And we have to work to try to maintain that ecosystem. As I say, the forest can take care of ourselves. What we try to do is control what we do that would not upset that ecosystem, that it actually cause destruction. And that's the role of forestry in terms of managing the forest ecosystem, which links to other ecosystem because it links to the rivers and then to the sea and the ocean. And we tend to look at the watershed approach in terms of our management of the forests and the forest ecosystem.
Okay, Andrew, can we talk a little bit about World Environment Day and the background, the backdrop to the observation of this day annually?
Yes, World Environment Day it was designated by is a day that set aside by the United Nations so that we can focus on the environment. And as Dr. Murray and Providence said, that we are at the stage, humans being, we are at the stage where we are destroying the environment. And it is the environment that kept us alive. There's the environment that gives us food. It's the environment that, you know, if we want to find new medicine and so on, it is the environment that we would look towards so that to get all these things that we are talking about. And that this year in itself, that we have some serious problems. We have the whole issue of climate change. We have the destruction of the biodiversity, which is, you know, claim that over 1.3 million species are either endangered or close to extinction. And we have the ocean, which is extremely important, but that is being destroyed by acidification and pollutions. We dump billions and millions of tons of plastics in the ocean itself. And then we saw last year the outbreak of the COVID-19, which exposed everything. You know, look, within a very short period, COVID, the virus spread from China across Asia to Europe and across the globe. And so who are the people who are, in a sense, impact mainly are the persons who are very poor, women, farmers, and so on. And within our own situation within St. Vincent, the volcanic eruption even make open a wider gap and expose quite a lot of the inequalities that we're currently facing. And so what happened last year, the UN get together and they designated this decade because for them, this is the last period, the last 10 years. If we don't do something to deal with the issues that we face, that we're looking at some very dangerous damages and so on that may be irreparable. So this decade is from 2021 to 2030. This decade is designated as the decade of ecosystem restoration and also for the restoration of the ocean itself. So the meeting that is taking place, there's a meeting and which would go on to, but I just want to give an overview that should be taking place in Scotland in the next few months. This would be a very critical meeting when the world leaders would be looking at developing strategies and programs and providing the resources to ensure that this decade become a very successful decade. For example, the last decade, they see it as a decade of the last decade, you know, basically a decade which there have not been much successes in terms of biodiversity preservation and climate change, reducing the impact of climate change. So this is the situation that we're in. We're in the last, basically the last stage, the last decade. We're hoping, and we know that 1 year almost finished. So we're hoping that within the next 2 years or so, there would be concrete action supported by resources, supported by money, you know, to ensure that this happens.
So what are some of the things that are likely to happen over the next decade or during the next decade?
Well, if we don't bring climate change under control, that we see, and right now I saw on the news in the US there are forest fires. So there can be, you know, serious issues around the earth itself. And I don't want to sound like a prophet of doom, but we're at this stage where the Bible said that the end would be with fire and brimstone, but it seems like we are moving closer and closer towards this end. So these are things that we really need to do. We need to also to our biodiversity, the wildlife, whether the plants and that type of thing. We also need to ensure that, you know, these are being secured. We're talking about food security. We in St. Vincent, with the impact of the volcano, that a whole third of the country, and you can say close to about 2/5 or three, close to about, yes, 2/5 of the country that is in terms of the food wipe out. So this is something that we really need to look at. And as Provi said, St. Vincent, we have, whereas a number of countries within the Caribbean, we have groundwater. St. Vincent mainly surface water. And so that a large chunk of our forests being destroyed. If you look all around the Sofre area, north, almost the entire north is patch. The other issue that we have is that because of the ash and the impurities that is in that ash, because we don't know how toxic that is. We believe that it is very toxic. The issue of our water system and the security of our water, that is something that is, we may face quite a lot of problem. So we have food, water, and then the people themselves, their livelihoods. North of the dry river, these are people who are self-sufficient. They don't depend. Some of them never move out from that area. They live on the land. They live on the water. They fish and that type of thing. So this is an area that is completely being destroyed. And so it's something that we really need to look at in St. Vincent in terms of the impact and what is coming out in St. Vincent. Here you have north of the dry river is an area that is basically much poorer than the rest of the country. And so this again, as I said, it brought out the inequalities within the population and so on. So it is something that we really have to remedy as soon as possible.
Okay, you mentioned COVID, you mentioned the volcano, and those are two things that are we are currently having to deal with here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. When we come back, I want to hear the views of the rest of the panelists on how they think the ecosystem has been impacted by both COVID-19 and the volcanic eruption. We'll take a first break at this time.
On Friday, June 11th, there'll be thousands of dollars to be won. A lotto jackpot of $302,000. A new home, car, or that college education.
Lotto, you have to be in it to win it.
Next lotto jackpot, $302,000.
This evening on the VC3 News Update, the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, makes donation to the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Police Force. The Fisheries Department in SVG called on fisheries stakeholders globally to invest sustainably in our seas and oceans. And the Center for Disease Control, CDC, updated SVG COVID-19 alerts at level 3. We'll have these stories and more coming up at 7 p.m. on the VC3 News Update.
More jackpot money, more reasons to play this game. More money for way, Super 6 a bigger jackpot game.
The Super 6 jackpot for Friday, June 11th is $270,000. Super 6, more jackpots money.
More jackpot money, more reasons to play this game. More money for way, Super 6 a bigger jackpot game.
Welcome back. As I mentioned before we took our break, Andrew spoke about COVID-19 and the volcanic eruption. I'd like to hear from both of you. How has the ecosystem been impacted by both of these events?
Okay, let's start with COVID-19, a relatively new thing to many of us. What this virus has done is that it has caused isolation in a number of instances. We have developed the world as a whole to high levels of specialization. So one country grows bananas, the other one grow rice, and the other one grow whatever. So we become so interdependent. With the lack of movement because of the virus and the fear of spread, it means now that the things that will come from country A to go to country B are either slow in coming or not going to come at all. So country B now has to survive with all that's produced itself. We now have to look at the sustainability of our food security and our own independence. In other words, we have to start seeing how we become more independent. That's something we have allowed to slip away. We eat so much foreign foods that the things we should have been taking care of, we fail to protect them. So a lot of our produce have disappeared. The things that you used to be able to get, people don't produce them anymore because you buy something that's overseas. Worse than that now, with the volcanic eruption, some of the things have been, the population have been decreased, right? So you have less of, even you go to the market to buy some dashing and the price is suddenly jumping to $7 for one instead of $3 and $4. Why? Because a lot of it in the north has been destroyed and what is left below has a high price now. So we now have to get those plants and get them reproducing in a shorter space of time to meet the needs of the market space. So our food security is in danger from both COVID and the volcanic activities. Socialization also has this impact in terms of the whole lifestyle of people, educational development, etc. So people are not able to move the way they did for their educational opportunities, the young people. The volcano again displaced people out of their regular places. So our educational system, which we're hoping to build the minds of our young people to cope with all the challenges, to embrace this whole idea of environmental management, is falling short. So the foundation is being destroyed, but yet you're also destroying the structure that exists there. So both COVID and the volcano have put serious impacts on St. Vincent and the rest of the world. I'm only pointing to us here because we have the volcano compounded with that. One of the other things we note that right now we are still having the Sahara dust. When you combine the Sahara dust with the remnants of the volcanic dust in the air, persons who are asthmatic or who have compromised health systems have another challenge on their hand. They have to struggle with all of that. And then having to wear masks continually now, which some people have very great difficulty with. So you have a lot of challenges being mixed here, being intermixed. And these are some of the immediate things that we need to deal with. Andrew talked about the water. I know St. Vincent, for quite some time we have been exploring the idea of groundwater. We are not starting from zero, that's one good thing. We do have some sense of where groundwater exists and how to manage it or how to extract it. But now it's going to start thinking about cost, because groundwater requires you have to pump it up to the surface, and then you have to get it to some height if you're going to do gravity, or you have to use pumps to push it around. So the cost of supplying water is now going to be different. And water controls everything, your beverage, your food, your health system. So cost of living is going to go up automatically because we now have to look for new sources of water. Not look at this point, because I think there's a good sense of where the thing is. It's just a matter of harvesting it and managing it. You know? So those are some of the immediate things that we need to be looking at.
Okay.
Well, not to repeat what Dr. Murray said in terms of food security, yes, this has taught us about that. That's COVID. But also in terms of the vulnerability of ourselves as humans and our ecosystem, our life forms around. Because we have seen before where pathogens, we're dealing with COVID on the human side, but we've had pathogens that have come in that affect our plants and our animals. And they're usually transported by humans. There was a pathogen, the citrate fungus, that was affecting a lot of amphibians, mainly the frogs. And that came in and it almost decimated the mountain chicken population in Dominica. We have found it in our frogs, but it's not impacting on them. And we do have an endemic frog here. So you see the vulnerability of pathogens, movement. The COVID pandemic has shown us how vulnerable we are to that. In terms of the volcanic eruption, I would look at terms of sticking with the theme for World Environment Day, the reimagining what really happened, because the volcanic eruption is like a process of restarting creation in a way, or if for evolutionaries in terms of the evolution of things. And I've been studying in terms of the vegetation on the volcano for several years. And since 1979, persons have been walking up the volcano, but I don't think they look at the vegetation and how it has changed over those years, even in the recent years. You've seen particular species move from lower down to further up, because that's the way of the volcano recreating and reestablishing itself. And if we can reimagine what is going to happen now, in 1902, it's a similar eruption, but it took several months. We had it for a month, and today is the first month's anniversary of the start of the explosive eruption. And I had the opportunity to go up to Bamboo Range.
2 months, actually, 2 months.
2 months. Oh,
yeah.
April, mid. Oh, yes. Yeah. Time is going so fast.
Yeah.
Yes, 2 months, and I'm already seeing life coming back on the volcano, because there's a species we call pioneer species. They come back first, and persons in the countryside would know this species called puado, or we call it Spanish ash. The older people used to eat the fruit. It's a basil, bean type fruit, and persons eat it as a white edible interior. I've already seen seedlings coming out of the ash in terms of that. But one negative thing which goes back to our impact on the ecosystems is that as I walked up to the Bamboo Range site, because the road was blocked and you had to do a lot of climbing over logs and trees and so on, I saw 2 water bottles.
Really?
So I'm saying, but the human impact is already there. And so you see how we take care of the environment and how it's given us an opportunity to help the volcano to restore itself, the vegetation in it, without us impacting negatively on it. And persons should be mindful of that. And I think it's an opportunity we are We have to learn how to take care of our environment better. Because we can walk in on the volcano and bring in pathogens, bring in exotic species that will just take over and just destroy the whole ecosystem. We've seen it with the pink mealybug that came in, and we almost lost all of our hibiscus plants. They're now coming back because we were able again to bring in exotic bees, ladybirds that would be able to, so there's a balance in terms of that ecosystem. And as it say with the COVID pandemic, we come in what we call herd immunity. The environment has a way of settling itself, but we as humans can prevent that settling as soon as possible, as creation would want it to be done. So the opportunities we have here in terms of restoring the vegetation of the volcano is to really reimagine and let nature take its course with our guidance. There would be areas where we have to do some restoration quickly to prevent the lahars from impacting on humans again, because we are living closer to the volcano. In 1902, maybe there were not that much people living around those areas. Yes, we had the indigenous populations, but there wasn't that big population. You didn't have the big Chateaubriand and so on. There were some communities, but they were able to move out. But here we are very close to the volcano. How do we ensure that it comes back, the ecosystems come back in a way that is guided and would actually enhance our opportunities for continued production and sustainable environment. In terms of the impact on the water, well, as we listened to the scientists, we were worried about lahars happening just, that was one of my main concerns, but he said for several rainy seasons, because that ash, again, it's the earth coming back out at us, but it hasn't gone through the process of binding itself, being bound by the plants growing in it and so on. So we have that happening, and then we have climate change, where we're having extreme weather events. Over the past few years, we see the impact in that northeastern part of the country where there were a lot of flooding. Those rivers that became lahars which destroyed homes, that happened before, I think in 2016, 2015, and 2013. Yeah. Because those, what appears to be dry rivers, ephemeral streams, become torrents, which is something we have to understand also, because the rainfall that we get on the coast is not the same thing in the mountain. So when you have 13 inches of rain in a matter of 1 to 3 hours, the torrents that come down would happen annually. But now you have it mixed with ash and mud and rubble, which again builds again on that. So it's an opportunity for us to learn how to better land use and land manage our areas. A floodplain is not the best place to be building homes. You should look for areas that are more stable, and how we work with the environment to protect these areas, again with plants and so on. We have to go through a process of learning and application to restore these areas properly.
In view of the challenges of or the impact of the volcanic eruption, what are some of the challenges that you face now in managing the forest resources?
Well, the first challenge we had to look at in terms of rescuing and protecting the species out there. One of our vulnerable and one of our what we call the flagship species, our endemic St. Vincent parrot. That is an indicator species for the health of the forest. And one of the things we did was we went out and we established feed stations, because we know nature has a way of reacting and things. So we know the birds would have moved away. Not all would have escaped, but we know they would have moved away, and they would have wanted areas where they would have been able to be rescued. Because again, we have moved closer to those areas, those remote areas, they would have a challenge in getting food, both because of the ash on it and also just is maybe less at this time. So we are able to establish some food stations, and we also checked on the health of the population of the parrots. And again, in my walk on Tuesday, yesterday, I was able to hear parrots in the valleys close to the volcano, which means, yes, there's resilience there and there's population healthy. We're going to go in and check. We're hoping to have a parrot census and a parrot survey to see how the population is there. But as I say, it's an indicator species, so we'll also be looking at how that relates to the other species around. Because on the volcano, we had a few endemic species, but the volcano has been erupting over and over, but the species will feed in by wind or by animals bringing them in. We'll have to monitor that. But one of the things in terms of the restoration is bringing in exotics that become what you call pests or invasives. In that if you bring in a particular species and it has no natural enemies, and I gave the example of the pink mealybug, it will just take over everything and would destroy, upset the whole ecosystem. So it's important for us to be mindful of those, that what we do should match with what the environment would do also.
Okay, when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we can actually do to restore the ecosystem. Yeah, back in just a moment.
On Friday, June 11th, there'll be thousands of dollars to be won. A lotto jackpot of $302,000. A new home, car, or that college education.
Lotto, you have to be in it to win it.
Next lotto jackpot, $302,000.
This one is fabulous.
Yes, fabulous. It's Fabulous 500. Another $5 scratch game from the NLE. Loaded with $500 cash prizes.
With a top prize of $25,000.
You have 10 chances to win.
Fabulous $500.
There's cash to catch with just a scratch. Fabulous. Fabulous 500.
This evening on the VC3 News Update, the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, makes donation to the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Police Force. The Fisheries Department in SVG called on fisheries stakeholders globally to invest sustainably in our seas and oceans. And the Center for Disease Control, CDC, updated SVG COVID-19 alerts at level 3. We'll have these stories and more coming up at 7 p.m. on the VC3 News Update.
More jackpot money, more reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6 a bigger jackpot game.
The Super 6 jackpot for Friday, June 11th is $270,000. Super 6, more jackpot money.
More jackpot money, more reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6 a bigger jackpot game.
Welcome back. Well, during the break, we were talking about some of the sites that you've been seeing as you go through the country now, where some of the birds are. Where did they actually, or do we know where they went to during the eruptions, and what's happening, what's likely to happen now?
I don't know if the forest officer can tell you where they went. I mean, they were trying to escape the ash as much as everything else. But those that are very before this north would likely come a little further south where things are not that hectic. And that's where we're seeing a number of them now in the southern area, not up north. But we're talking about recreating and restoring. One of the things we have to be careful about, Mr. Providence mentioned the idea of the plastics up there. It's not just the plastic, the whole human influence on the re-establishment of the ecosystem up north. As the forest tries to re-establish itself, if people start creating roads in places, start cutting things before they grow, start trying to introduce their own species. Like I said earlier, human beings are one of the most destructive forces to nature itself. Right? If we go in there and start trying to carve things up before the ecosystem gets a chance to, do the seeding with those pioneer species, come back and set the funding to anchor the ash and all of that. We could see this continual movement of ash for a much longer period if we don't allow things to settle down. Also, I am not quite sure how we are going to handle the idea of moving people back up in the north. There's some areas far north that might not be able to accommodate people this soon. And so we might have to settle with people moving south like the Pirates did for a while. And might be a permanent thing or might be a better thing to change the dynamics of land use in that area. But those are things we have to look at because we as humans who are the ones who are doing the greatest damage to the system need to check ourselves and see how we manage that interface.
How do we get people to understand the importance of acknowledging their responsibility in this whole process?
I want to challenge our education system. We have developed a kind of education system that tells people they must all go to books and everybody must get degrees. I'm not against getting these things. I think everybody should. But in doing all of that, we have completely abandoned land management. As a young boy growing up, my grandfather will not allow us to pick young fruits or stone fruits. He'd tell you, climb the tree or get a stick and pick the fruit. You stone a mango tree and the young ones got knocked down, you in for whooping. You go up and you pick as much as you want, you can eat, and he never sees you. Today, what I'm getting at is that we lived in harmony with nature. We've lost that. I saw some young men coming into an area where I live, and they're going on somebody's land, and there's a little coconut tree. It's about 8 feet tall. And those guys wanted the coconut. You know what they did? They cut down the tree. What I'm saying here is that we have lost the respect for nature and the things around us. And so we have to get an education system that begins to inculcate into our people the value of the ecosystem, the value of the things around them, the value of the birds and the bees and all of those, and how we need to protect them because we depend on them. So somewhere our education system has to go more than just getting a degree or passing some CXC or whatever, but to living, surviving on the spaces that is ours.
Andrew Simmons, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
Yes, and I think I just want to continue on the point that made by Doc, the whole importance of education, building the capacity of our people, whether starting from kindergarten right up through the education system, out to informal education, because that is, to me, that is extremely important. And there is a model that is called Climate Change Education for Sustainable Development, developed by UNICEF. My research was mainly on that, and I spent the past 2.5 years in Africa implementing that approach at tertiary level, working with over 12 universities and colleges and TechVox Center in terms of pushing this through. We develop curriculum, we develop training manual, we train teachers, instructors, and so on. So for me, this is an opportunity that we have in St. Vincent, an opportunity to build back, but to build back in a sustainable way. You know, I documented quite a lot of that work in my book, and this is the book itself, and I'm in the process of, in a sense, preparing some journal articles, because we have done 2017 an extensive amount of work that can be very important now. We use what we call a participatory mapping system, and we implement in 6 areas in St. Vincent, from Byra to Joy River, in Georgetown area. We did it in Marquard, in Thai Marquard village, where we brought people, stakeholders, representatives from children right up to people over 80s together, and they give us the experience. In fact, when we were in Georgetown, somebody was telling us what they were told about the 1902 eruptions. And I read some articles by Dr. Adrian Fraser that in a sense indicate some of the facts. So those maps, there are 36 maps. We did it in Beckway, we did it in from the airport to across Caliapore. We did it also in not in that entire Chatibele Fitzuse area. So there are 36 risk maps that look at the GIS maps that look at the risks in terms of senses exposed to climate change and development calamities such as the volcano. And one of the reasons why we didn't go north of the dry rivers because we didn't the time and the financial resources to cover that. So that map is available. So we look at tsunami, we look at hurricanes, we look at issues pertaining to landslides and that type of thing. And we develop what we work in collaboration with the physical planning department in the Ministry of Sustainable Development to develop these maps. So here, that is what is available. We also did it in Vermont, sorry. What is available, a set of 36 maps that if we want to resettle, if we want to whatsoever we want to do for in the country, those maps are available. And those maps, they have knowledge from 1902 right up to present time. Well, there wasn't anybody who's still living, but in terms of this information that was passed on by people. Also, what the guys from physical planning did, they other information, what they did, they were able to put it inside the maps themselves. So this is, for me, a rich resource that is available, and it is done through a participatory methodology, a qualitative research standpoint, and to me, which should be extremely useful. So this is one area that is there. The other important thing in terms of responding, that we can't look at this as an instant coffee. There isn't any instant coffee approach to dealing with the resettlement or rehabilitation or restoration of people, communities, and so on after, well, moving forward after the eruption. To me, this is an excellent opportunity that the government has and the people of St. Vincent have in terms of making a bold statement in terms of showing that we are going to reorganize the whole planning structure. We are going to deal with resettlement of our communities, of our people. We are going to educate people, because it cannot be done by government officers. It has to be done by the entire community. I think one of the sad things in St. Vincent that we were able to destroy our NGOs. St. Vincent had in the 80s, 90s, some of the most active non-governmental organizations that was doing far as much work as government. And I think that is something that that we need to focus on. I remember when I did the research, the young people were saying, you know something, every time that there's a storm, and they were looking at 2013, 2012, 13, and 2015, 16. And they were saying that we are the first to go in to help. But as soon as the government officers them come in and the politicians come in, they take everything over and they push us aside. You know, we really have to be careful with St. Vincent is too small, you know. So I think for me, this is something that we have to look back in terms of building our NGOs, our National Youth Council, to me, which was one of the most vibrant and in the entire Commonwealth, gone. You know, the good thing is that the people like us, we are still here. There are no more persons who came through the National Youth Council I remember I went to 1998. I was from the Commonwealth, representing the young people. There was Maxwell Haywood from the United Nations. There was some other groups, guys from St. Vincent, Cheryl, but they were representing Latin America and the Caribbean, and the head of the UN Youth Program came to me. I mean, is there a university in St. Vincent that produce people of this caliber? I said, yes. We have one of the best universities. We have the National Youth Council. So I think what we have to do.
Yeah, the point is you're saying that these are some of the things we need to do if we are going to be restoring our ecosystem?
Yes, our ecosystem, because it has to be with people and start with people and finish with people. Because other than that, the same very people will turn back and destroy it if they're not part of it.
All right, so in our final segment, we are going to talk about some of the very distinct things that we can do to restore our ecosystem. Back in just a moment.
On Friday, June 11th, there'll be thousands of dollars to be won. A lotto jackpot of $302,000. A new home, car, or that college education.
Lotto, you have to be in it to win it.
Next lotto jackpot, $302,000.
This one is fabulous.
Yes, fabulous. It's Fabulous 500. Another $5 scratch game from the NLE. Loaded with $500 cash prizes.
With a top price of $25,000.
You have 10 chances to win.
Fabulous $500.
There's cash to catch with just a scratch. Fabulous. Fabulous 500.
More jackpot money, more reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6, a bigger jackpot game.
The Super 6 jackpot for Friday, June 11th is $270,000. Super 6, more jackpot money.
Hey! More jackpot money, more reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6, a bigger jackpot game.
We have not even been able to talk about World Oceans Day, which was yesterday, and what are some of the challenges and what are the links between the land and the forests? What are some of the challenges we face in this regard?
Well, in terms of World Oceans Day, we are collaborating with the Sustainable Development Unit, now under the Ministry of Tourism, to do a little reforestation of plants at the Brighton Beach. We know that beach is threatened with the Atlantic Ocean, and we need to restore our coastal vegetation, because that's the first buffer to sea level increase in rise that coming in and taking the land. We need to restore mangroves, keep them going. If we look at on the coastal, at the Richmond coast, or even the coast around the volcano, we have to do some remapping or reshaping of the island, because beaches that were disappearing in Sandy Bay and beyond have rebuilt. Really? Because of the Lahars coming down. The Walibu River, the whole coast is totally different. The Richmond beach going up to Walibu was sort of a straight beach. Now it has this big gorge at the Walibu River with with a lahar, well, not a lahar, that would have been a pyroclastic flow that deposited over 10 feet or so of material. So you now have a cliff rather than the river where you could just walk into. You now have to jump into it, and that has to settle. We don't know how it's going to settle, but how humans going to impact on that is our concern. As we've been echoing, how we as humans, as Vincentians, I wouldn't say as humans only, as Vincentians who have an anthem that says a land so, our mountains so high and green, how do we make sure that they remain that way? We have to plan how we resettle these areas. We have a tendency to forget what happened a few years ago and go back and to make the same mistakes, and then nature comes back and says, I told you so. So we have to address how we do our land management, how we do our land use issues, where we keep agriculture, how we protect our river courses, which impact on the ocean. Because after every rainfall, you see the sea and the ocean around us, how it's brown because of that. Now with the lahars coming down, yeah, there would be a grayish-brown tinge in the waters around. That would have an impact on our nature. The logs coming through. Well. But then the logs can also create areas for fish. Okay. So we have to see how we monitor. And the thing is that there's no quick fix to the environment. You have to be a part of the environment and take your time and learn, as they say, reimagine what it was then and how it is now and how we want it to be. And so we will be able to work on restoration properly.
No. The one thing we have, though, is that we have some sense of what we are doing. We have years of experience to see what we have been doing. Like, for example, now the oceans, they're saying that the amount of microplastics in the ocean is rivaling the stars in the galaxy in terms of volume. There's so much microplastics. And we know where this plastic is coming from. The OECS have this St. George's Declaration of Principles for Environmental Sustainability. They have just redone that now for the 2020 to 2040. And one of the high points in there is the whole idea of plastics. Now, I notice our country is moving towards that, and we're trying to phase out the plastics in the supermarkets and all of that. And people are beginning to understand. But we have to do more, because the plastics in the ocean is really a major, major concern. It's a major concern. So not only are we talking about the lahars going down and changing the coastline and affecting the ecosystem there, and we no longer have shoreline fishing right now. We have the small fish that are along the coast. We don't have them right now but with time, they will build themselves back. But the things that are not going to change very quickly is like the plastics in the ocean that we really need to pay some attention to. And we know that. So that's not one of the things we have to work with over time, like Mr. Providence and Andrew saying. There's no instant coffee in terms of restoring. We have to work with it, we have to live with it, understand it. But we know what's happening to plastic because we've had years and we see the consequences, so we need to deal with that like now.
But what's the solution?
Well, a lot more reduction, a lot more management, a lot more, again, the education, the use of plastics, the phasing out of plastics, and what do you do with those that you have? We need to go from that direction, from that standpoint.
Okay. And there also needs to be a responsible approach. Like, as I said, I was surprised and frustrated and a little angry seeing those 2 plastic water bottles with the label still on. So I know it's those water bottles that came in recently. And why the person who went up there just didn't take it back out. Mm-hmm. They were so obvious, and that they're going to stay there. They're not going to, the ash is going to break down and become nutrient-rich soil because things are growing. There's some vetiver grass that was planted up there that struggled, but they were blooming green in terms of the nutrients that came from the ash and also the moisture that it held to make them grow. But the plastic bottle is not going to do anything but sit there and create a problem and look very ugly in terms of it. All you had to do was stick it back in your backpack and take it out. Person shouldn't have been up there because it's still dangerous to get through there, but as forestry, we went up there to make sure that they can have access back to the site where the seismic people want to reestablish a new station there. But we have to take that responsibility to watch what we do in terms of the environment so that it can be restored properly. Yes, we may have quick fixes that may bring in some resources, but if you, for example, if you do a plantation forest, which means you bring in plants and you plant them in nice rows and so on, you have to maintain that forest every year with finances, paying people to clear this and clear that. But you don't have to be that when the forest comes in naturally, the pioneer species establish and they make room for the more long-term species, the climax species. And you don't, nature just does itself. As one person say, you'll go to the hospital and you have to pay for oxygen, but every day we breathe enough oxygen free to us. So we need to be more responsible in terms of restoring our ecosystems and our environment. Yes, we want to grab and everybody wants a piece of land here, but we need to realize that it's going to come back and affect us. Persons who live, oh yes, it's nice too, we can go and live in the flat area of the riverbed, and then the rain comes and the river comes down and your house is destroyed. Who's going to put that back? So we need to be mindful of our environment and where we do. Be a responsible approach, and there's an opportunity for education also. In doing geography, you would look at how land is built, but we have it happening right in front of us now. A geography class going down to the Wallaby River can see, they can see what it takes a textbook to explain in hundreds of pages in an hour. And we need to see that opportunity and how we can work with that in terms of nature educating us to take care of our environment better, and how, from where the St. Vincent and the Grenadines come from. We all say it's a volcanic island, but now we see the opportunity to really realize what a volcanic island does to us and how it sustains us and how we can work with it to better develop. We must look at the Sustainable Development Goals, and I go for the one which deals with life and land, which means our life is sustained by the land, and we must protect the land that feeds us.
Okay, does your department have any specific plans in terms of this ideal of restoring our ecosystem?
Well, one, we are constantly monitoring, and we want to bring in a research element in terms of how is the